Ancient symbols always carry an air of mystery, but what happens when they do more than recount history, when they hold the power to manipulate the human mind? In a shadowy corner of Delhi's night market, under the flickering glow of oil lamps, a man hands Dr. Anirban Mehra a small stone tablet, his eyes darting away as if fleeing from something. The tablet, caked with dust from the distant Indus plains, is etched with angular, razor-sharp symbols. As Mehra touches it, an invisible jolt courses through his skin, as if the stone is whispering a secret no one should know. That night, in his stifling room, Mehra places the tablet under the desk lamp. The symbols seem to writhe, absorbing the light, distorting his shadow on the wall. He tries to sketch them, but each stroke pulls him into a nightmare. Visions of a dead city, streets choked with sand, and hollow eyes staring into the void. He wakes, heart pounding, to find his window wide open, though he swears he locked it tight. On the desk, the tablet is gone, leaving only a streak of fine ash and the acrid smell of burnt resin. Unbeknownst to Mehra, deep beneath the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, another tablet waits, bearing the complete sequence of symbols, a primordial formula not meant to record, but to command. Will he find the strength to resist the call from the darkness, or become the next victim of symbols that should never be read? The story begins when a farmer discovers a fragment inscribed with strange symbols in his garden. Uninterested in archaeology, the farmer hands the fragment to a local merchant. The merchant, in turn, sells it to an amateur archaeologist for a week's wages. That man, Dr. Anirban Mehra, would later confess that the moment he held it, he felt a prickle under his skin. The glyphs seemed to hum in silence. They caught the light wrong. He joked to colleagues that it was like the tablet was looking back. No one laughed. Mehra's initial notes were optimistic. He theorized that the tablet belonged to a lost branch of Indus Valley writing, perhaps a ceremonial script used for blessings. The find stirred academic curiosity, another window into a civilization still cloaked in mystery. But the more he studied the lines, the more the optimism cracked. Unlike other inscriptions, this one lacked repetitive patterns. Late one night, under the glow of a flickering desk lamp, Mehra sketched the symbols on fresh paper. He noticed something odd. Each stroke of the glyph mirrored astronomical coordinates, not letters. The angles matched the positions of certain stars during the summer solstice stars that the ancient world often associated with disaster, plague, and death. The realization chilled him, but he pushed forward. By the third week of study, Mehra's demeanor had changed. His letters to colleagues grew curt. He began locking his notes away, refusing to share updates. At a symposium in Delhi, he presented a sanitized version of his findings, omitting the more troubling alignments. Privately, he admitted to one trusted friend that he suspected the glyphs weren't meant to record history or religion. They were instructions. And then came the second tablet. Found in the ruins of what had once been a marketplace, it bore the same angular script, but this time the arrangement was more complete. A ring of symbols surrounded a central mark, a triangle within a circle, flanked by two vertical lines. Mehra's pulse quickened. That central motif matched carvings from another site, thousands of miles away in a temple on the island of Sri Lanka, where oral tradition warned of a tongue of stone that could speak death. His research turned feverish. He pored over old excavation reports, tracing the glyphs trail beyond the Indus, into the mountains of Afghanistan, across the Iranian plateau. Every time the symbols appeared, the archaeological record hinted at calamity. Cities abandoned overnight, skeletal remains piled in courtyards, layers of ash with no signs of fire. Someone had carried these glyphs across regions, leaving ruin in their wake. Mehra began to suspect an inventor behind the script, not a poet or priest, but an engineer of a different breed. A mind capable of compressing dangerous knowledge into a compact form, disguised as harmless writing. Perhaps it had been designed for control, a form of ancient psychological warfare. The symbols might have been a weapon of the mind, triggering fear, obedience, or worse. Still, the academic world was slow to alarm. They dismissed his growing paranoia as the occupational hazard of staring at the undeciphered too long. Yet Mehra couldn't shake the stories. Shepherds who vanished after uncovering carved stones, divers who drowned in calm water near submerged ruins, traders who died suddenly after handling seal impressions. And then the fragment disappeared, stolen from the locked drawer in Mehra's study. There was no sign of forced entry, no footprints, no fingerprints, just a faint scent of burnt resin lingering in the air. It was never seen again. The theft didn't stop him. Mehra reconstructed the design from memory, working with sketches and photographs. But without the original, the details blurred. He became restless, irritable, convinced someone or something was watching him. At night, he would wake to the sound of faint scratching, like stylus on clay, coming from the walls. No one knew that deep beneath the ruined streets of Mohenjo-Daro, sealed behind a wall of baked brick, lay a third tablet. And on it, the glyphs would form a complete sequence, one that, if read aloud in full, would set in motion events no one in the modern world was prepared to face. The reconstruction of the glyphs consumed his waking hours. He rented a small warehouse at the edge of Karachi, telling the landlord it was for storage. Inside, under harsh industrial lighting, he began to build. Not an artifact in the traditional sense, no replica for display cases, but a machine. He was convinced that the glyphs were not merely symbols to be read, but instructions for assembling a device. Each stroke of the script, he realized, corresponded to a physical action. A cut, a measurement, an angle. He treated the glyphs like an engineering blueprint. The first stage called for a circular base, no larger than a human hand, cut from a strange porous stone that matched samples from quarries long buried under silt. Procuring it was an ordeal. The only known fragments were in private collections. Rumour had it that one such piece sat in the safe of a retired British diplomat in Lahore, acquired during the colonial period. Mehra, who had never stolen a thing in his life, found himself considering burglary. The second stage was worse. The glyphs described a kind of lattice, woven not from fibers or metals, but from human hair, treated with a resin that emitted a faint, sweet odor when heated. The treatment process was precise to the point of cruelty. The resin had to be aged for 29 days in complete darkness, stirred only with a bone stylus from the wing of a large seabird. The first real disaster happened not long after that. By then, the second object was complete an amalgamation of stone, resin, hair, and an alloy no one had seen since the Bronze Age. Mehra had not planned to test it so soon, but a visiting curator from a European museum insisted on seeing the marvel he had been working on. Her name was Dr. Clara Weiss, and she had an unshakable confidence in her ability to debunk mysteries. It was Mehra's own pride that led her into the warehouse. He told himself that a quick demonstration would prove the harmlessness of the artifact, at least outwardly, while still impressing her enough to secure future funding. They stood at the workbench under the same harsh lights, the object between them. Weiss leaned in, tracing the air above its surface, careful not to touch. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "But what does it do?" He showed her the sequence. 3 glyphs, aligned precisely with a brass pointer he had crafted. The moment the last symbol clicked into place, the lights dimmed not abruptly, but as though the electricity itself were retreating. The air thickened. Weiss opened her mouth to speak, but froze. Her pupils widened until her eyes were black. Her breathing slowed, each inhale drawn out like the pause before a scream. Then she whispered a phrase. Mehra didn't recognize the language, but the tone chilled him. It was identical to the voice from his dream. The syllables seemed to ripple through the air, bending the shadows along the walls. Objects on nearby shelves trembled. A glass beaker slid to the floor, shattering without sound. Weiss collapsed forward onto the table. Mehra caught her just before her head struck the edge, but she was limp, her skin alarmingly cold. Her pulse fluttered once, twice, then nothing. Panic took over. He tried resuscitation, but it was like pressing against a mannequin. Her body retained the shape of life, yet felt emptied hollow in a way no living thing should. In desperation, he disconnected the glyph sequence, rotating the pointer back to neutral. Instantly, the lights returned to full brightness. But Weiss did not. For nearly an hour he sat on the warehouse floor, staring at her still form. In that suspended time, one thought looped endlessly. This is the first. There will be more. He didn't call the police. Instead, he wrapped her in a canvas tarp, loaded her into his truck, and drove into the Sindh desert. Somewhere between the dunes, under a moonless sky, he buried her shallowly and scattered sand until the ground looked untouched. No one reported her missing for 3 days. By then, the museum she represented had quietly removed her name from their rosters, claiming she had taken personal leave. Mehra knew what that meant. Someone else was invested in keeping this quiet. Whether it was the museum, a government agency, or a shadow network of collectors, he couldn't tell. News of the death never broke. But something else did the object's reputation. Word spread among a small circle of researchers and fringe historians. Mehra had built a device from the Forbidden Glyphs, and it had worked. Others came, offering him money, artifacts, even land, in exchange for access to the original blueprints. He refused them all, but the offers grew stranger. One man claimed he had seen the glyphs before, not in a ruin, but in a cave in the Pacific, carved into the bones of a whale. Another swore his grandfather had survived a reading of the script in the 1920s, but his hair had turned white overnight. Haunted by Weiss's death, Mehra revisited the old records. He found patterns he had missed. In every site where the glyphs were found, the population had collapsed within a single season. Not famine, not war. People had simply stopped, as if the will to live had been erased. It was a death sentence in symbols. He locked the second object away, vowing never to activate it again. But he also knew the temptation it carried. In the wrong hands, the glyphs were not just dangerous, they were final. One night, about a week later, 3 mysterious men came to Mehra's laboratory in the dark. From the doorway, figures entered 3 of them, their faces hidden behind clay masks marked with the triangle in circle symbol. One of them carried something in his hands, a slab, no larger than a school notebook. He recognized it instantly, the missing first tablet, stolen from his desk months ago. It was whole now, edges sharp, the glyphs unmarred by time. They set it beside the second object, and the 2 pieces seemed to respond to each other, their carved lines pulsing faintly with a red glow. They placed the third piece on the table, a fragment he had never seen before. Curved like a crescent, its surface etched with the final sequence of the glyphs. With the 3 artifacts united, the hum surged into a single piercing tone. The masked figures stepped back, as if giving the device space to breathe. The room darkened, yet the shadows grew brighter than the air around them. In the gloom, Mehra saw vision cities he had never visited, their streets empty, windows yawning open to nothing, oceans boiling under a red sun, crowds kneeling in perfect silence, faces lifted toward an unseen command. Mehra felt it then. The pressure in his mind, subtle at first, then irresistible, a suggestion, a nudge towards surrender. The glyphs were not just shapes, they were triggers, embedded deep in the human psyche, bypassing reason. This was no weapon in the physical sense. It was worse. It rewrote the choice to live. His knees buckled. He caught himself on the edge of the table, forcing his gaze away from the pulsing lines. And he knew it was true. The sequence was complete now, existing in memory, in photographs, in sketches buried in forgotten archives. Even if the physical objects were destroyed, the knowledge would persist, waiting for another mind to stumble across it. The hum began to fade, the glow dimming, until the objects lay inert once more. The figures turned to leave, taking nothing with them. They didn't need to. The work was done. By the time Mehra stumbled outside, the rain had stopped. The street was empty, the night too still. In the distance, somewhere deep within the city, he thought he heard the faintest echo of that whispering voice carried on the wind. The years that followed blurred into a long shadow. The warehouse was abandoned, its rent unpaid. A sealed police report listed Mehra as missing, presumed dead, though no body was ever found. And yet, in certain circles, his name still surfaced attached to rumors of a man seen in remote archaeological digs, a man who never spoke above a whisper. The glyphs, meanwhile, had taken on a life of their own. Copies circulated among collectors, passed under tables at black market auctions. Governments denied possessing them, but intelligence agencies quietly catalogued sightings. The few who studied them in earnest either vanished or withdrew from public life, citing unforeseen psychological effects. And in scattered parts of the world, small things began to happen. A village abandoned overnight. A ship found adrift with no crew. A factory where every worker simply stopped, mid-task, and remained motionless until death claimed them. No one linked these events officially, but those who knew the glyphs saw the pattern. The story of the Forbidden Glyphs settles now into quiet, though the quiet feels fragile, as if one stray breath could shatter it. Somewhere the tablets may rest under lock and key, or perhaps scattered in private vaults, their surfaces dark beneath layers of dust. For now, they sleep. But history has a way of circling back to its hungers. The Indus Valley was not the first civilization to rise and fall, nor will it be the last to leave behind something better forgotten. We tell ourselves that knowledge is always good, that progress is inevitable, that the act of uncovering is noble. Yet the glyphs remind us that some inventions are not meant for light. But the truth lingers in the quiet obsessions of archivists. The glyphs survive in fragments, waiting for someone to notice that their angles align too perfectly, that their shapes do not behave like language, but like a lock seeking its key. And if that someone happens to fit the key, the hum will return. Until then, the story slips back beneath the surface, joining the countless other secrets buried in the world's oldest dust. For the rest of us, perhaps it is enough to know that curiosity can be both a light and a fire, and that the oldest fires never really die out.